Cool.
18th Amendment prohibition.
That's my entire research paper.
What just happened there? Here we go. Here we go.
I'm ready, Miss Gray.
Guys, we're recording.
Wait, are we like recording right now?
Yes.
Alright.
I'm sorry, what? Abby,
Are we ready?
Oh my God.
Here we go.
because
How you
Abby's
amend the
recording.
Constitution, okay? Amending the Constitution is done in one of two ways, okay? The amendment can be proposed in two ways, okay? Through Congress.
Oh my God.
Leave the room, please.
You're gonna have to.
I'll put your bag on the ground.
Yeah. BT, I'm coming to sit there.
This is going to be outstanding video here. We're recording.
Your bag's officially on the ground.
It's so hot.
Give me like a
So-
lullaby.
All right? You can either have it through Congress with a 2/3 vote or a national convention that is called by legislatures of 2/3 of the states. Okay? So that is how you propose an amendment to the Constitution. All right? The idea is that it is very difficult to amend the Constitution. Okay? If you have done that in order to ratify, okay? How you ratify the Constitution has to be done through either legislatures of 3/4 of the states, okay? So 75% of the state's legislatures must ratify it, or
So don't they all have to ratify it once it's ratified?
no,
What?
or conventions of 3/4 of the states. So if you have an amendment and you only have, let's say that South Carolina doesn't want to ratify this amendment, if 75% of the states do ratify it, then it becomes an amendment.
So then they have to follow.
They have to follow it.
Is that what ratifying is?
No, ratify means so it's proposed, so that it's there. Ratify means it becomes part of the Constitution.
What's the difference between legislators and the conventions? 'Cause
So the legislature is going to be the actual state legislature, so like the people who meet in St. Paul.
isn't that what makes it for national convention?
So this is a national convention. So the national convention would be you could actually convene a convention of the citizens
okay.
of the state, right? Yeah.
So for the national convention, is it a 2/3 vote of legislators from all the states, or
Correct.
2/3 of the?
So if the states, so I see what you're saying, Brittany. So if the states decide they want to propose a constitution, they would call a national convention that would be made up of basically the legislatures of 2/3 of the states. Okay?
So but then.
So like it would
a
be
state
Minnesota and Wisconsin and Iowa. You'd have 2/3 of all those states that would together create this national
So but
convention.
then what if like California doesn't want that?
As long as there's 2/3, they can propose the amendment. In order to pass it, though,
But then it would only be for their state.
nope, it would be. So it's for this is for
Just
the
to
United
follow.
States Constitution. Okay, but if you think
So
about
does it have to be a majority, or is it
2/3.
2/3 of that 2/3?
No, so if you have two, so the theory is if you have the national convention, you're only convening for the purpose of this amendment, right? We don't have national conventions
Yeah.
regularly, so it would have
But
to
if
be.
it's, so you have to have a 2/3 vote of that group,
You-
which is 2/3 of the
If
state.
they're going to be there, they're basically acknowledging that they are
Oh, they're
in
not
agreement
yes.
with it. If they don't agree with it, they're not going to go to the convention, right? Does that make sense?
How often are like amendments added?
So that moves us to the amendments. Okay, there have been a total of 27 amendments to the Constitution. Okay, 27 total. The first 10 were
Bill of
done at the
Rights.
same time, and that was the Bill of Rights. Meaning, from 1791 to 1992, which is when the last amendment was done, so that is in 200 years, there were 17 more amendments. So not very often. So when you hear people talk about we should have a constitutional amendment for gay marriage, we should have a constitutional amendment about abortion, we should have a constitutional amendment about gun control, this is extremely hard to do. The intention being that it should be extremely hard to do when you do this. Okay? So let's go through the key amendments. Okay? Number 1, First Amendment. Okay? This is your First Amendment. This is the sort of most basic rights that we have. What are the 5 parts of the First Amendment?
Life, liberty.
Religion.
No. Religion,
Speech.
speech,
Trust.
press,
And petition.
petition, good,
Assembly.
and assembly. Good. Right to protest, the right to petition for change, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom of speech. Okay? Sort of the most basic rights that we have, right? Second Amendment, as everybody probably knows, right to bear arms.
Yes, bears arms.
Okay? So, the right to bear arms is obviously a very controversial one for many people. The concept of what the founders meant when they produced that is something that can be discussed in great detail that we're not going to get into, but what is the point of a militia, that sort of thing. Okay? 3 is the quartering of soldiers is not allowed. This is a direct response to the Revolutionary War. Obviously, we do not have an issue with the quartering of soldiers in the United States today, so that's one that we don't really doesn't really impact us. Number 4.
Wait, what was that result of?
So remember when in the Intolerable Acts, one of the things was that the British were able to go into the homes of citizens. So this is basically saying we're going to make sure that does not happen anymore. Okay. 4, search and seizure. Okay. A police officer cannot go into your house without having a warrant, without having a judge say that you can do it. They cannot search you. The police can have probable cause to do that, but for example, if you get pulled over while driving and you've done nothing wrong and the police say, I want to search your car, they cannot legally do that unless they have probable cause. They can come up with lots of different ways to say probable cause is there.
Do they have to have like a probable cause to pull you over?
Right. So that's where you get the issue of, for example, the whole issue of
Like the black people.
African Americans getting pulled over more often than white people. That is where you see issues with this, right? So that's 4. Okay.
Wait, what was 3 again?
3 is the Quartering Act. You
Are we
can't
going to
quarter.
review all 27?
But the Bill of Rights, they're significant that we talk about them, that you kind of know what they are. And as you're probably hearing, most of these are things that you inherently know. You just don't know necessarily where they come from.
I'm just
Right.
glad that you don't have to talk in a court unless it's
So, number 5, okay? You've ever heard the phrase pleading the fifth, right? In court, right? You do not have to self-incriminate, okay? So you must be formally accused of a crime. They cannot just arrest you for nothing, okay? You can't be tried twice. This is the double jeopardy clause.
Isn't that unless they get new information?
No. So if you are, so for example, OJ, right? When OJ was found not guilty of murder, okay, he could not be retried for murder. Emmett Till, right? When Emmett Till was found, when the 2 guys were found not guilty, and then they gave an interview where they said we killed him, right? You cannot be tried again for that. So what happens is when you
Could they
see,
try for a different kind of murder?
but not for the same murder, right? So
Well, like,
Oh, because he
can't they
admitted to
arrest
that
them?
one.
Because they
No.
just
So once you've been tried and you are found not guilty, you cannot be tried again.
So, but what if you're tried for like first degree murder and then they can choose to try you for second?
No. So what they have to do is basically, that's why when they determine what they're going to charge you with, oftentimes they'll charge you for a lesser crime because they think they can convict you of that, and there's not enough
So-
evidence to do it otherwise.
So is there a difference between like premeditated
Mhm.
and like manslaughter? Could you be tried for each one and then
No.
get convicted of one?
No, because you're being charged for that one crime. So it's the crime itself.
Say you were like charged for extortion at like state court, and then like the state like pushed it to the federal court.
On
wouldn't that be-
appeals.
Like, what do you mean appeals?
So if you're found not guilty or guilty, it can be appealed. Okay? But it cannot be retried. Right? So what you can do, so here's the difference. OJ, for example, is found not guilty in a criminal court, but then he is charged in a civil court. The civil court, you don't go to jail for it, it's a fine. Right? So he's found not guilty in a criminal court, and then he's found guilty in a civil court, and he's ordered to pay $30 million. But he can't go to jail for that crime. Okay?
What is an appeal?
An appeal so is where if I am found guilty of a crime, right, I can appeal that case to a higher court to try and overturn that. If I am found not guilty, you cannot appeal a not guilty verdict to a higher court. Okay? Because you are innocent until proven guilty. Right? And that would be the double jeopardy. The other piece is that you have the right to not self-incriminate yourself. Okay? You do not have to testify if you don't want to. Okay? 6 and 7 are the fair trial clause. So you are guaranteed trial by jury. Okay? You are guaranteed a lawyer, even if you are not able to afford one. Okay? And you may
Wait,
confront a witness.
Which one's which?
7 involves it involves what you have the trial by jury if it's a crime, a case over $20, which is an old thing. So it really has just become you have the right to a trial by jury if you so choose. Confronting a witness, what that means is if I accuse Jenny of theft, she has the right to question me in court. I cannot. Now I can say I don't want to talk, but then if I'm accusing her of a crime and then I'm not willing to talk about it, that's not going to be much of a crime, right? So you have the ability to do that.
Is that the confront witness part?
Correct. All right. Number 8 is excessive punishment. Okay. Meaning that if you are arrested for stealing a loaf of bread, you cannot have a bail set at $5 million, right? Your bail, which is how you get out of jail before a trial, has to be equal to what you have, and you cannot have excessive fines, and you cannot have cruel and unusual punishment for that crime, right? So if you steal a loaf of bread, they cannot give you the death penalty for it, right? Number 9.
Depending on your lawyers.
Well, in theory, right? Number 9 is the enumerated rights. Spell this right. E-N.
Rights of parents.
These are rights that are not listed in the Constitution. We still have, okay? So, for example, we have the right to drive, right? We have the right to do it. It's interesting that in this, which this was written in the early 90s, this packet, you see that it has the right to marry as an example on there, which of course was one of the big issues that came up with gay marriage, is that this should be a right to marry no matter who you want to marry,
Wait,
right?
so what are the?
So they're not listed directly in there. It is just certain rights that we have. We have the right to be able to travel between states. We have the right to be able to get married. We have the right to be able to have a driver's license.
Are they written in the?
They're not written in there. It's just an.
It just says if there's a.
There is an assumed right. Okay, as it says, the enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed or denied to disparage others retained by the people. So basically, if there are rights that people have, everyone should have those rights. And now those can be, so separate but equal would have been argued at this time with this concept. Yeah.
What is right to be left alone? I mean, right to be let alone.
The idea that you have the right to your privacy. Right? And number 10, okay, the last of the Bill of Rights, okay, is powers reserved to the states. Powers reserved to the states basically is saying that any law that is not specifically given to the federal government goes to the states. So, sales tax. In Minnesota, we do not have sales tax. In California, they have sales tax. We have the ability to make that choice.
Wait, can you say what you said before?
If a law is not specifically required by the federal government, the state has the right to create that law. Powers reserved to the states.
What if they don't want to have that law?
Then they don't have to. So we don't have a sales tax. We could have a sales tax. It's up to us. What we charge or what we do for the driving limit. That is our choice, right?
Be like 12.
You could do, I don't know if you could go younger than 16. I don't know.
This place was 15, for sure.
Are there? I mean, you
Well,
can.
if
I know
you-
there are
it's like
17.
if you're like farmers or
13
if you're like
like a
driving.
truck.
Right, but so the state can decide those things. Okay?
Circle fan.
All right. So as we move through the next set, the Bill of Rights are the most important. The other ones kind of come clumped together. 12 is the election of the president and vice president. We talked about that. That's 11 is it's you can't sue a state. If you're,
So I
a
couldn't
state
sue
can't.
Minnesota.
A state, right, through the federal court. You can sue the state, but you can't do it through the federal
You can
court.
sue Minnesota. What?
Sure,
For
if
what,
they,
what,
if
what
they,
would you sue Minnesota for?
The government.
you sue the government. Yeah, if they've taken away your rights. If you've been arrested that you feel like, or if you've been charged with a crime that you don't feel like you've done,
That
right?
makes sense.
So, all right, 13 through 15, which we've discussed, are the Civil Rights Amendments.
We don't care about 11.
What are those?
12 is we just talked about 11. 12 is the presidential. It was a result of the Jefferson-Adams presidency. They elect them separately, right? Abolition of slavery, citizenship, and right to vote. Okay, we talked about those in class. All right, 16 through 19.
Would you ever ask us like which amendment is the right to citizenship, or would you just ask us which is the civil rights amendment?
In this, I will not ask you specific amendments like that. Okay.
And that only applies to African Americans, right?
What's that?
That only applies to African Americans.
Slavery and right to vote. Yeah. 16 through 19 are our progressive amendments, which we just talked about, right? So 16 is the income tax, right? 17 is direct election of senators, right? These are things that are now given to benefit the people. 18 is prohibition. Prohibition is where alcohol becomes illegal in the United States. 19 is women's suffrage, right to vote. Women only gained the right to vote in 1920. It's been less than 100 years. And we will talk about in class in this unit why that occurs, how the war really kind of gets that going there. Okay. Amendment 20, which is, yeah.
Did you say 16, 17, 18?
Yep, 16 is income tax. 17 is direct election of senators by the people as opposed to state legislatures. 18 is prohibition.
19.
No, 19 is right to vote for women.
Right. Are you ready to vote?
I have. 20. Okay.
So funny.
20 is simply, it used to be the inauguration of the president was in March.
What does this fall under?
It's just its own thing. Okay. 20. This is one that you don't need to know, but just sort of is just so you.
I'm still looked at it.
It used to be that the president would take over in March, but the election was in November, so there was like this 4-month period where you had a lame duck president that really didn't have any power. So they moved inauguration to January. So they just shortened that time period. That would happen. Okay. 21.
Fine, I-
This one I do want you to know. This is where prohibition is repealed. All right? So this is the only amendment that is getting rid of another amendment. And the only way to get rid of an amendment is to re-amend the Constitution. Right? So 18 makes alcohol illegal. 21 makes alcohol once again legal.
What was the point of making alcohol
They thought that it was immoral, and there was a big push for purity in the United States and morals. Yeah, that's sort of
It gets into like the end of summer where they get a bunch of home intemperance.
right. And it built off of it was tied to women's suffrage as well. Okay. All right, 22. 22 is term limits. This is following FDR. This is in the 50s, saying the president can only serve 2 terms. It takes Washington's precedent and turns it into a real thing. Okay. 23, nothing essential for our sake. This is where electors are given to Washington, D.C. up until 1961. If you lived in Washington, D.C., you couldn't vote for the president, which is kind of interesting because you weren't a part of a state. So now they have 3 electoral votes. Okay. 24.
Does Washington D.C. usually like swing in a direction?
They're Democrat for the most part. 24 is no poll tax, meaning that you cannot have you cannot charge someone to vote. This was done in the South. This is a Jim Crow thing.
Can the president vote?
Absolutely,
That's really fun.
and that they'll always do that. You'll always see when you get to the election this time, they'll always have somebody showing. If it's Hillary Clinton running, it'll be Hillary Clinton voting, or if you have that's.
Do they vote for themselves?
I hope so.
Yeah, I would be very nervous about
I would think so. It's not like second grade where you're like,
I
I'm
can't
voting for my
myself.
friend. It's like,
Did you
yes, usually I would assume they vote for themselves.
see the video of Obama voting, and then he's standing next to this woman, and the woman's boyfriend comes over, and he's like, "Don't talk to her."
I've seen the video. I don't remember, but yes. But that's the thing. It's like you go back to where you're from, right? Because Obama votes in Illinois. That's where he's from. But you can imagine if I don't know, Amy Klobuchar was running for president, and you go in to vote, and all of a sudden you're like, hey, presidential candidate Amy Klobuchar. It'd be kind of fun, So 25. You might say you don't got my vote. Sorry. 25 is done after Kennedy's assassinated. What that does is it says that if the president is unable to, if the vice president if the president dies, the vice president will take over and there will be a replacement immediately. Also, if the president is unable to perform their duties, you can replace him with the vice president temporarily. So, for example, when George Bush had some surgery, Dick Cheney was technically the president for a couple hours when Bush was under sedation, right? So you can have that.
Totally.
Okay.
Is that an important one or?
No, that's more of a procedural thing. 26.
How many countries
Do we not care about 25?
That was 25. That if something happens to the president, the vice president can take over. 26. The voting age is 18. This is directly from the Vietnam War. We are sending kids off to Vietnam to fight who are 18, but they're not allowed to vote.
So is the voting age 20?
There's a problem. So the voting age was 21 at the time. So the voting age comes to 18. Okay? And 27, which I think is a great one to end on. This was originally proposed in 1789, and it was passed in 1992. So it's something that's always been there, and it involves congressional salary.
Oh, is it like congressmen can't set their own salary?
What it means is that if the Congress is going to raise their salary, what happens is it will not kick in until the next Congress starts. So what that means is if we were all in the Congress, we're like, hey, let's give ourselves $1 million pay raise, right? We would all have to be reelected in order to benefit from that. So it prevents them from saying, we're going to give ourselves this huge raise, because if you're going to give yourself a huge raise, the American people might not like how that goes over. Okay? And that's it. Those are all the amendments to the Constitution. There has been no push right now recently for a real new amendment, but one of them will eventually come, but I don't know what it will be. So
Was 27 a response to something, or people starting to think about,
it was just to make sure that it didn't happen. It's always been a concern.
It is a good
Question! All right.
We're